we can just get started.
Okay.
We're starting with the first chapter of the book of Daniel. We'll start reading from the King James Version, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Here we go. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God.
This is setting, I think, some a little background, right, into the rest of the narrative.
Yeah. So right at the very end, we're in the terminal stage of the kingdom of Judah, the whole history of God's people, going from Abraham, all the promises about the land of Canaan belonging to the children of Abraham, and then going through Jacob, when they become the Israelites. This whole era is coming to a close, and God is setting up the king of Babylon, of all people, to take over this land, and he is going to be the new ruler of this land, which we'll see a lot about in the coming chapters.
Right. I think also it's pretty much the end of the era of the kings, starting almost like 400 years before they started with the first king, Saul, but making that transition from being a tribal confederation to being an actual kingdom with an actual government. And so far they've had many different kings, and this is kind of like their very last, the end of that era, basically. After this, they don't really have any more kings, or they don't have kings which are actually Jewish. Whereas here we actually have that whole long dynasty starting from David onward. After Saul comes David, and then that keeps going. The same dynasty holds true for at least a few hundred years.
Right. Yeah. So God's promises went into the era of the kings, but with promises even to specific kings about how God would bless their line, and that their descendants would sit on the throne, and that they would, always rule over that area. So this is it's a big change happening here. That has all come to an end due to the the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah breaking their covenants with God. And so God is setting up now foreign rulers over them.
Right. It's like also this is kind of like the last stronghold, let's say, of the Hebrews, because remember, and after David comes Solomon, then the reign of King Rehoboam, they split the 12 tribes. So then there's 10 tribes become one kingdom. And Judah is actually a kingdom made up of 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, right?
Right.
And now
Yeah.
Israel's been destroyed, and all of those Jews and Hebrews are scattered. So they're all scattered, the people there. And now all that's really left is the kingdom of Judah, and specifically Jerusalem, like the last stronghold that's holding out against foreign invasion and
Yeah.
foreign coming.
When you see the numbers involved, you realize just how small they've become at this point. They don't
Yes,
have more
very,
than a
very
few,
small.
yeah, only like a few thousand soldiers. Jerusalem is the only major city. There's no big armies anymore. There's no big saving moments. It's just like their whole era is come down to a very small point and is about to disappear for good. And as you already mentioned, the Israelites themselves are already living very much in foreign lands. They've been taken into Media and into Assyria. There is already a large diaspora living across the ancient Middle East.
Right. I think even we could say Jerusalem itself is all that's left. I think previously it mentions, right, the Assyrians, Babylonians were conquering parts of Judah and the other cities. So it's even just Jerusalem itself, the one capital city, is still like the main center of the Hebrew nation and is still holding out against the Babylonians.
Right.
And this, I think, also is the first invasion, right, by King Nebuchadnezzar of Judah in I think I had it here somewhere. Let me see. In 605 BCE.
Okay.
Right. So this is about 6 centuries before the birth of Christ.
Mm.
And this is, I think, the first, right, of the invasions. And afterwards, he invades several more times and completely destroys Jerusalem.
Yes, yeah. So this is when he takes King Jehoiakim. If you look at the other books, he comes back a few months later and takes Jehoiakim's son, and then
Yes.
sets up Zedekiah as king.
And then 11 years later, that the whole thing is destroyed. The whole city is
yes,
destroyed. All of the people are taken into captivity. But this is like the first warning, I guess. And
right,
he
right.
took
And the Jews
temple.
could have God's plan for them at this point is for them to continue on in peace as subjects of Babylon. That is the
Right.
message of Jeremiah, but they go against that message and end up with a very tragic downfall.
Yes, sad to say.
And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans.
So basically, he's taken hostages, right? From the royal family and from the nobility's children, basically.
Right. Yeah. So again, this isn't a super violent takeover.
No, it's not.
He's taken the king, and he's taken a lot of the best people to make them part of his court. Nebuchadnezzar is really a very energetic king who has a lot of the credit for founding the Babylonian Empire. Of course, it started with his father, but Nebuchadnezzar is really just this masterful conqueror and administrator, and he is just very forceful. He likes he likes the people in one area. Says, okay, I'm going to take these people, I'm going to make them my people, and they're going to serve me over here to make Babylon better.
Right. And so it says, I think this is also supposed to be a fulfillment of that prophecy in Isaiah, right? Where Hezekiah, the king Hezekiah at that time, he shows the Babylonian ambassadors all their treasures and all their wealth and stuff like that. And then he's like, okay, look, now they've seen everything. They're going to come back and they're going to take your sons and your descendants and make them eunuchs in Babylon, which would have been considered.
Wow. Yeah, that's something. Yeah. So the Babylonians at that time learned how much Jerusalem had. They had all this wealth. They have this class of skilled people, and they remembered. So then, when they become powerful and they start conquering, they come back to Jerusalem and they take
Yes.
everything of value, including the king's own descendants.
Yes. And this would have been, I think, a pretty severe thing, right? Because eunuchs in the ancient world, they were very much part of all the palace administrations of the Middle East, of Asia, of Africa. But at the same time, they could not have children.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't this in some ways be cutting off also the line of David in some ways?
Oh, sure. Right,
Because
right.
all these young people would be unable to have children.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of plays into what Daniel becomes. The story of Daniel is just a story of utter faithfulness and devotion in spite of just the worst circumstances. So we can see that this Daniel, who has no more connection to his people, no more connection to his heritage, and yet we're going to see what becomes of him.
Right. Also, eunuchs couldn't worship in the temple, right? I think they were not allowed in the temple.
That's right.
Grounds.
That's right.
At least in Israel and in most of the ancient world, they were even subject to a lot of like discrimination because like they needed them, but at the same time they were like, how the operation transformed their bodies and stuff. So they would be like, oh, they're kind of weird, effeminate, kind of creepy, prone to always plotting. Especially in the ancient world, there's a lot of stereotype.
Yeah, that's right. And we will see that Daniel and his friends end up being the subject of a number of conspiracies and plots. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego.
So he's basically changed their names so that instead of the names reflecting God, the Israelite God, they will reflect the Babylonian gods, right?
Yeah, and it's a very cruel fate that these four young men suffer.
Right. I think the gods Bel, right? Aku or
Hmm.
and I think Abednego, the god Nego, right? They were all different Babylonian gods.
Oh wow. Okay.
Were they really children or were they more like young people? What do you think?
I've always thought of them as being teenagers. I don't know.
I
Young.
guess maybe preteens, 10, 11, 12.
I would say somewhere between the ages of 10 and 20.
Right. Okay. Since the term children, yeah, it's pretty loose, but it also sounds like they were quite young, considering how much time they were put into apprenticeship and
Yeah.
study. So I don't think they were too old. Like they were probably not adult men.
No, no, probably younger. I would say towards the younger end of the 10 of the teen age range. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king.
So Daniel won't eat basically any of the king's food. The king's meat, I guess you're meaning his food in general, not necessarily just his meat. And he tells the chief of the eunuchs that he won't. I guess because
Yeah,
the meat was probably also not kosher, since you know how they have to kill it in a special way and
right.
prepare it. And I guess the Babylonians would not have done that.
So this is of course in the first chapter, the first story about Daniel's very exemplary faithfulness. As we've
Mhm.
talked about, he's cut off from his people. He's lost his name. He's lost his heritage. He knows he's there's no going back for him.
Yes.
Yet he has decided he is going to remain faithful to what he knows of the law. And interestingly, he comes from a culture that has been very unfaithful to God. It's not
Yes, they
like
were all pagans.
right, yeah. So it's like the king and the king's ministers, they were very wicked people. They were oppressive. They were lawbreakers. They were persecuting the prophets. Yet Daniel of the nobility, he has a very strong faith. Maybe that's due to his parents, or maybe due to some teacher he had. But Daniel and his three companions, in spite of everything they're going through, remain faithful.
Right, which is really exemplary because, yes, they were growing up right in the middle of that, in some ways, center of paganism, of wickedness, and they're like, they have such a strong faith and at such a very young age. So, and also in those days, I wanted to mention the gods, they would usually dedicate the food, like meat and I guess pork and whatever they would eat to the gods, right? Usually would be offered to the gods in the temple and then brought to the king's table. So, could that be another reason why he doesn't want to eat it?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I think all the commentary on this is that for one, they're eating things that were against the Jewish culinary laws, and of course, there's things that are offered to idols. And as we know, food offered to idols is a big no-no. Even into the New Testament era, the
Right.
apostles are telling new Christians don't eat food offered to idols. So yeah, those two things are just major taboos for the Jewish people, and Daniel would be it would be it would seem excusable, but he feels it would be going against his convictions to do that. And just so much of this story is Daniel rejecting what the world has to offer him, staying true to God, and then finding significant rewards through his relationship to God.
Right.
Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat, and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants.
What's pulse? Is it like lentils and vegetables and stuff like that? Peas, I
Yeah,
guess?
I think it's just a translation just for plain foods, legumes,
Right.
legumes with some fresh vegetables, maybe. I mean, at the
Right.
very least, yeah, just like lentils, maybe some other things added into it.
Right. If you think about it, the king's food, that would have been also really good. Like that was
Oh,
literally
sure.
the best food that Babylon could possibly offer. The emperor would have it. And it's like, and they're like, no, no, we won't eat that.
Yeah, I mean, even today, if you had the chance to eat like I don't know what your food's like there in Romania, but like for me, if it's
Very good.
like tortillas and meat, and then with wine, I mean that's great. That's luxurious food.
Oh yeah, here too they have like sarmalen, the stuffed peppers and chorba and all kinds of soups, and it's like, man, super good.
Yeah, yeah, and with a
Thank you for
lot of
that.
like sausage or
Oh
nice.
yeah, there's a lot of pork. They eat a lot of
Yeah,
pork.
yeah, and that's great. Like most people can't afford to eat like that every day, even today. And then with wine and whatever other kinds of luxury food items, and they're being offered this, and it would be so easy to just say, okay, well, I'm going to enjoy this at least, in spite of all the things I'm suffering. I'm going to enjoy this, but they decide no, they're not going to do that.
Right. Also was considered in those days, I think, a very great honor, right? You'd have food right from the king's table.
Right.
For
Yeah.
example, I remember reading in Imperial China, they would have to serve over 90 dishes or so to the emperor and empress every day. And
Mm,
obviously, they wouldn't eat all of that. So most of that food from the king's table, let's say, would be redistributed to the servants, eunuchs. Uh,
yeah.
so probably there was some kind of situation like that with Nebuchadnezzar as well. Like
Right. Yeah.
they would have these ceremonial number of dishes that had to be set for the emperor every day, but then they would like, okay, the servants and all the king's court would eat it, and it was considered a very great honor. Like you're literally eating food from the emperor of China's table himself,
Mm, right.
like the
And
absolute best stuff.
of course in ancient times all the way up through medieval times, the uh rulership was based on charisma. Like you had to be the person that everyone liked and looked up to. So, for the king, this big, powerful person, he could beat you in war, but he could also give you all kinds of great stuff. He could make your life bad, or if he liked you, he could make your life very good. And people liked the king and they wanted the king to look on them and show them favor. It was very much dependent on personal relationships. Like the reason
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar was this great king was because he had thousands and thousands of people who were like his clients, who he had a personal relationship to. He was giving them things and they were serving him.
Right. I think even in the book of Proverbs, there are few specific proverbs about the king's favor. Talk about,
Mm,
okay, when blessed is the man that the king looks well on him. I don't remember them exactly, but stuff to that effect.
yeah, right,
That was
right.
a big thing, having the king's favor.
Yeah, so Solomon understood that. He really understood, the dynamic between the king and his subjects.
He had to understand that he was the king.
Right.
And he himself knew how great it is, I guess. He was like, isn't it nice to show favor to people?
Yeah.
All right.
So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. It makes sense, that if you're going to stay away from the meat and wine and the rich foods, and you're going to stick with simpler foods, you're going to end up being healthier. And I'm sure, they were it helped them be sharper, and it actually made them look better.
Right.
In in ancient times, like it was known that like for people whose work you value, you give them food that's good for them. So it's a little bit funny even that the Babylonians are giving them all this rich foods and whatnot, but Daniel knows better and he is proven to be right.
And this is very clever of Daniel, if you think about it, because he doesn't explicitly say, no, we won't eat the king's food and you can't make us, just try us. He very politely and respectfully asks, no, look, can we please have something else? And even he asks for a test that can we do it for 10 days, which sounds reasonable.
Right.
Like he doesn't say, we'll never eat it. Like, we will never eat it. He's just like, no, can we have a test of something else for 10 days? And if at the end,
Yes.
Obviously if it hadn't worked, probably, I guess they would have had to eat the king's food then without complaint.
And we're going to see that a lot throughout this book of Daniel. Daniel knows he's right about something, and so he says, okay, let's make a test of this. Let's see what happens. Give me a chance.
Yeah, exactly. Like, give me a chance, and then it actually turns out to be the right one.
Yeah. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus.
Well, that's a very long time then.
Yeah.
Because Nebuchadnezzar, he ruled, I think, around 40 years, 40, 50 years, right? Quite a long time.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, he did.
There, but yeah, somewhere around there. And then comes out what after 3 or 4 other kings. So Daniel,
yeah, there were a few.
Daniel was around for a long time.
Yeah. So again, that backs up the idea that Daniel was very young at the start of this.
It's interesting. It says here that Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams, and we haven't read chapter 2 yet with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Is it possible that Daniel was already showing some signs of being able to interpret stuff? Maybe he'd even interpreted some dreams for people before, not the king, but
Yeah, it's likely that he was a bit like Joseph in that he just had a gift for hearing dreams and then knowing what God was trying to show in those dreams.
So basically right now they've studied for about 3 years, right? It says. So now the 3 years are up and the king has basically been testing them, I guess interviewing them, so to speak.
Yeah. And all 4 of them, they're going to be put in more than one life or death situation where their faithfulness their faithfulness to God is going to be put to the ultimate test, and things could go either way.
And it says also that they're 10 times better, which is really good, considering Babylon was supposed to be like the center, right, of, I think, astrology, astronomy.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mesopotamian wisdom and lore was just, so ancient. They've had such a long heritage of magic and astrology and all the sciences and everything. And yet,
that time was already a few thousand years, right? I think at least 2,000-3,000 years.
Oh yeah.
Backlog of just magicians, astrologers, people who are skilled in astronomy.
Right. And yet it's these Jewish children with their faith that end up being the most impressive of all.
Which is a very tall statement to be 10 times better, because he had probably the best in Mesopotamia. He probably had a ton of people who are like already well trained and had been active in the field for years. And it's like, no, they're all shown up by these kids.
Yeah, and in the next chapter, this all gets put to the test.